Hey everybody, this is Kemp from CreativeCashFlow.com. Today we're going to be talking about some of the basic understandings that you've got to have under your belt before you can get into the full spectrum of the owner financing world and just really the investing world. What's some of the stuff that you really need to know and understand at its core basis before you can get moving on that? So first, let's talk about what is owner financing. Okay, what is owner financing? At its core, what are we really talking about? I know there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is and isn't, and so really, what we're talking about here is we just want to say, instead of buying a house, getting a mortgage with Wells Fargo, getting a mortgage with Bank of America, and paying them every month, the buyer in this situation is going to buy the house, they're going to get the deed, but instead of paying a bank, they're going to pay the seller every month, okay? The seller is holding the note for this purchase that they're getting. So that is a tool that we really like using in the investing world because it has a lot of really good benefits to it. But as we talk about what owner financing is, we also need to understand that there's owner financing, the phrase owner financing, that's kind of an umbrella, okay? There's a lot of different parts to owner financing outside of just saying owner financing. So let's look at the owner financing tree, okay? Owner financing is, like I said, it's an umbrella term that talks about a lot of different strategies, and let's just be clear about what that is, okay? So wraparounds are one version of owner financing. A wraparound mortgage, what that means is that you've purchased with some type of financing, okay? Let's say that there's a house that you buy, and you do get a loan from your local community bank, and so you've got debt on that property, and then after you get that debt, you choose to move forward and sell it to somebody else with owner financing. Well, let's say the debt you got on the property originally was at $80,000, and then you sell it to somebody else for $100,000 at a higher interest rate for a longer term. That's going to be a wraparound transaction. Wraparound transactions are an amazing way to make a spread on interest, to make a spread on equity, and really get the most money out of each transaction that you possibly can. I'm a big fan of wraparound transactions. Now, we're going to have a separate video specifically on wraparound, so if you want to learn more about that side and get into that, just make sure to keep watching this series and get through to that section because that's one of my favorite ways of doing this business. On top of that, you've got Subject 2. Subject 2 is also a type of owner financing, okay? Sub 2 refers to you've got a seller and they owe Bank of America $80,000, and they want to sell you their house. Well, instead of you coming up with cash to pay off Bank of America, instead of you saying, I want to buy your house and pay off the bank loan behind it and give you some money, Subject 2 is essentially taking over on payments. Now, I never want you to say taking over on payments to your seller, okay? Taking over on payments implies that there was an assumption that occurred. Subject 2 is not an assumption. Subject 2, you do not take over the liability from the seller. The seller is going to remain on the mortgage, but the title of the property is going to be transferred over to you. All right, so in other words, even though you've got a deed that goes from Joe homeowner to Jeff investor, Joe homeowner is still going to be the guy whose name is on the note and the deed of trust with Wells Fargo. Okay, again, it's kind of like taking over on payments, but whereas a assumption would say, we're going to take Joe homeowner's name off of this note and put Jeff investor's name on that note, that's not what's happening. We're leaving the homeowner's name in place as it is. Again, we're going to have another video on Subject 2 specifically. It's going to go really into detail about how to do this one strategy, so I do recommend you looking into that one. Free and clear. This is a nice, basic owner financing transaction, okay? Let's say that you're talking to Betty, who bought her house in 1943 and she's owned it forever, but she's just decided that it's time to sell. Well, if she doesn't owe the bank anything, if she doesn't owe anything to Bank of America or to Wells Fargo, she just has the deed and that's it, she owns the house free and clear, okay? At that point in time, she's free to owner finance it to whoever she wants. Now, just like you saw in the previous slide, we've got a buyer paying a seller. This would be a prime example of that, okay? If the buyer is buying a house that's free and clear, and the seller has said, yes, I will allow you to buy this house from me for $80,000, but you need to pay me $850 a month every month for the next 15 years, that's an example of a free and clear owner-financed purchase, right? There's no lender involved, there's no bank involved, you're just paying for the house. Let's talk about liens. What are liens? What are liens on properties? Well, liens are very important to us, okay? Because we have to understand a lot of information about what a lien is, how a lien works, what is and isn't able to be done with existing liens. So, what is a lien? At its core, a lien is just debt on a property. Okay, that's really all it boils down to. A lien says that you owe somebody something for this house. Now, what happens with liens and what kind of separates liens out and makes them special about this debt is the fact that that debt has to be paid before you make any money from the sale. So let's imagine that you have a house and you owe a mortgage on it. Well, a mortgage is going to be the most common type of lien that we're familiar with, right? The mortgage gets filed with the county. It's a public filing that says that when you sell that house, who gets paid first? Are you getting paid first and Bank of America gets the leftovers? Or is Bank of America getting paid first and you're getting the leftovers? Well, obviously it's the second version here, right? That's what a lien says. A lien says before the seller gets any money from this sale, I have to get paid first, all right? So there's a lot of different types of liens. Now, mortgages are the most common type of lien that we're familiar with. A mortgage is the type of lien that we're going to see all the time on almost everything that we're dealing with, unless you're looking at free and clear properties, specifically looking for those high equity deals. But what's another type of lien? Mechanics liens. If someone has done work on the home, say that you have a big plumbing issue and you got a plumber to come out and fix that plumbing issue, and that plumbing issue was $9,000, the plumber gets done and you say, cool, my plumbing's fixed. I don't really need to pay him anymore because he already did the work. See ya. Well, the plumber actually has recourse on that. The plumber can actually go to the county and file what's called a mechanics lien. That mechanics lien says, look, I just did $9,000 worth of work on this guy's house. He didn't pay me. Therefore, when he sells his house, I got to get my $9,000 before he walks away with any cash, right? So mechanics liens, that's something you really need to look out for on your title searches to make sure that everybody that's needing to get paid is going to get paid before you try to take over on any payments. Because here's the thing, I referred to subject to earlier, right? Subject to means that we're buying a house, we're taking title to the house, but we're leaving the debt in place as is, right? We're leaving that debt to Wells Fargo as it is with our seller's name on it. Well, we're not paying off all the debts that are there. So what happens if you miss a lien? Say there's a mechanics lien out there and you miss it at closing. Well, that can really mess up your whole deal. What if you've got a deal where you're running kind of tight and you say, okay, I'm going to take over on this $80,000 debt to Bank of America. I'm going to keep paying on that debt because the house is worth $100,000. Well, if you do that and then you put $10,000 worth of work into it and it's all fine and dandy, and then you're getting to the point where you're about to sell it to your end buyer or whatever, you're renting it out or whatever, just time goes by, and then all of a sudden you find out, oh my gosh, there's a $20,000 lien to Joe the plumber out here that we didn't catch to begin with. Well, that's something that needs to be taken care of one way or another, whether that's through making the payments or through paying them off. Sometimes you can get abbreviated payments, that kind of thing. But the point here is that you've really got to be cautious of what's out there and know what you're getting into. Tax liens, both federal and state taxes, federal and property taxes can put liens on a property, okay? Now, federal taxes, don't get too scared of those. A lot of people stray away from federal taxes, and I've bought a lot of houses that have federal tax liens on them, right? The problem is that people kind of confuse it with a property tax lien. A property tax lien is absolutely something that cannot get dropped. Property taxes got to get paid, right? The tax man's going to get paid, and if they're behind on payments on this property, you have to take care of that. However, because of some of our beautiful homesteading laws, if this was a homestead of the person you're buying the property from, in other words, they've claimed the homestead exemption on this property, and they're trying to sell you the house and they have a federal lien, in other words, they didn't pay their income taxes, you can actually get that dropped off with those homesteads. That's not going to kill your deal, because part of the Homestead Protection Act says that when somebody's selling a house, if they're not making any money on that sale, say they owe $80,000 and you're buying it for $80,000, if they're not making any money on that sale, the Fed will drop that lien. You might need to talk to your attorney and get them involved with getting that done, but you can get that dropped. And I've swept up after a lot of investors who have passed up on deals because they see a tax lien out there and they just assume it can't be done. Meanwhile, we make a call to the IRS and get it taken off, right? So just be aware that that's out there. Don't get too scared of the federal side. Really pay attention to the property tax side. Caveat, as I mentioned before, federal doesn't matter as long as it's their homestead. If this is an investment property of your sellers, maybe they had a tenant in there or something along those lines, yeah, you're going to have to make sure that the federal lien is getting taken care of at that point in time. The protections only arise on a homesteaded property itself. Child support liens. This is another really common lien that you might see out there, and this is one example that I wanted to throw on there of sometimes you have liens that are actually against a person, but are going to pass through to whatever property they own. So let's look at if Joe owed his ex-wife, $8,000 a month for child support, let's say, and that doesn't get paid. Well, they can put a lien on any property that he owns. So maybe he gets $30,000, $40,000 behind on payments. They can rule that when he sells his houses, homestead or not, that money has to get paid to his ex-wife. So be on the lookout for child support liens. That's something that can pass through. These are only 4 examples of common liens that we might run into, but there's multiple other types of liens out there. So just pay attention to your title company. Pay attention whenever you're getting your title search and title run done to what's out there. And as you watch this whole series, you're going to know a little bit more about what to and what not to do whenever you run into these types of liens. One important aspect of liens is that the only thing that determines lien position is the date and time in which it was filed. Okay? Lien position is really important because of what happens in the event of a foreclosure, and we're going to go through that here in just a second. But the thing to remember is that the only important factor about lien position is what day and time it was filed. So let's say we've got a mortgage to Bank of America that was filed on January 12th. And then Joe the plumber comes out February 7th, does a whole lot of work, and our homeowner decides not to pay him. Well, another month goes by and appreciation has just been massive and they've got all this equity in the house, and so they decide to take out a home equity line of credit. So there's another lien on the property. Well, now we've got 3 liens. We've got a first lien to the Bank of America, we've got a second lien to Joe the plumber, and we've got a third lien to Wells Fargo. You're going to hear me commonly refer to these as a first lien and a subordinate lien, okay? Because subordinate lien is the language that some of the laws use, like Dodd-Frank, that kind of thing, when they're referring to what can and can't happen in lien positions. But we are going to talk about either, hey, it's in second, third, fourth lien position, or it's a first, or it's a subordinate lien. So let's look at what happens with these lien positions. We've got a mortgage to Bank of America, and our buyer decides, I'm not going to pay this anymore. I'm tired of paying this mortgage. I don't want to do it. Well, what's going to happen? They're going to go through foreclosure, okay? Now, when Bank of America forecloses on them, what happens to those other 2 liens? What happens to the other liens that were out there in that title search? Well, the mechanics lien and the HELOC get completely wiped out. That's the risk of taking a subordinate lien position. When you are subordinate to somebody else's lien position, if that person forecloses for whatever reason, part of foreclosure law is that any of the subordinate lending gets completely wiped out. Those people get nothing, nil, nada, zit. Okay? So that's one of the things that we need to be aware of, especially in owner financing, because we're dealing with lien position. When we're buying a house and we're turning around and selling it with owner financing, well, we're setting up subordinate lending. Ourselves, when we buy it and we're buying it directly from our seller, we may set up something with our seller that says, hey, I'm going to buy this house, I'm going to continue making those payments on your behalf, and that's going to set up a lien. We're going to have a deed of trust. It's a deed of trust to secure performance, but that's a lien position. Well, Bank of America, whoever the first lien is, they're still in control. They're still the ones that are really going to have the decision at the end of the day. So if something happens and you don't pay Bank of America or your servicer messes up and doesn't pay Bank of America, which should never happen, but it's important to choose who you're working with wisely. Bank of America chooses to foreclose, everything else that you've done just gets wiped out. You will no longer make anything off of that. So again, it's important to look through this series and really dot your I's, cross your T's, understand what you're doing so that you can avoid situations like that. Let's look at another example. Our buyer continues to pay Bank of America, but Joe the plumber comes out. Our buyer does not pay Joe the plumber as they were supposed to. Let's say Joe the plumber gave them the option and said, hey, I'm going to let you pay this off and you can just pay me $500 a month for the next however many, right? Well, and they stop paying. Well, if our buyer is paying the first lien and is not paying the second lien, what happens? Again, foreclosure. Except this time, it's Joe the plumber that gets to foreclose. This time, the second lien position holder is foreclosing on the property. Well, this is kind of an interesting situation, right? Because our first lien is taken care of. Our second lien is not taken care of, but we have a third lien still floating out there. So what happens to that third lien? Same as before. It is subordinate, and this is again why I'm using the word subordinate. It is subordinate to Joe the plumber's lien. Therefore, when Joe the plumber forecloses, this HELOC completely wiped out. That HELOC to Wells Fargo will never receive a single dime more. Now, at that foreclosure, it goes to auction. Joe the plumber may take possession of the house. He may sell it to an investor. It's unlikely that an investor is going to buy a second lien position. And that said, if you are buying from the auction, be very cautious. Don't look at second lien position foreclosures and think everything is going to be fine and dandy at that point in time, because here's the thing. When Joe the plumber forecloses, yes, the HELOC is gone. However, this mortgage to Bank of America is still in full effect. So Joe the plumber, let's say he goes to foreclosure with this. Let's say he goes to the auction block, puts it up, and nobody bids on it. Well, he's going to take possession of the house. He then becomes the owner of the house. That's how foreclosure works. You've heard of the REOs and that kind of stuff when banks foreclose and take back a property. Same thing. He took back the property. He has possession of the house. However, he still has to take care of Bank of America because they're in first lien position. So whatever's owed to that must get paid. All right? Our lien positions are our life in owner financing. So really focus on that. If you need to look back through it a couple of times, do so because it's important to know. Now let's look at a couple of business tips. Just some basic items that need to be taken care of if you're going to be getting into this investing world, okay? 1, never put your own name on contracts. You should not ever put your own name on a contract as the buyer, as the seller, whatever. That's where you get personal liability. Any contract that I sign, I'm signing Grant Kemp as member, Grant Kemp as president, Grant Kemp as vice president. I am signing on behalf of my company because I am not going to put my own name on the line for any real estate transaction, no matter how great I think it is. The one place that you might be comfortable without having an LLC in place already is if you start to work with some other experienced investors as a bird dog. This is a great way for you to make money when you're getting going. I know I've paid a lot of money to a lot of people who are just getting going. They're looking for deals, but they might not have all of the systems set up. They might not have all the gears turning the right way. And so what you do is you find somebody like that and you say, look, I'm marketing, I'm finding deals. If I find something that works for you, I'll shoot it over to you, and then maybe we can partner up on the deal. Well, at the end of the day, it's still going through that person's LLC. It's still going through my LLC. It's still going through the other investor's LLC. But that's the one area where it might be okay for you to work without an LLC. If you do not have an LLC done, you need to create that LLC, okay? So if you need help with creating your LLC, with coming up with your business name, getting some tips on that kind of side and looking at it from people who have done it and been there, watch our LLC video. Watch some of that side of things so you can get an understanding of how to get your EIN, why that EIN is necessary, how to name your company, things that you might not have really thought about, but that we deal with all the time. This is a big one for me. This is a really big one for me. This is one of the things that I think separates me out from a lot of investors, and I think is one of the reasons why I have gotten the success that I do have versus what some of the other people out there have seen who have tried to get into it. You are a real estate investor. I'm going to say that again. You are a real estate investor. You are not a wholesaler. You are not a fix and flipper. You are not a landlord. You are a single-family real estate investor. For those of you who have read Good to Great, the book Good to Great, it's a really good book. Might I venture to say it's a great book. Anyway, the thing is, in there they've got a principle that says, it's called the hedgehog principle. The hedgehog principle says, do what you're good at, focus on what you're good at, and good things will happen there. The problem with a lot of companies is what they'll do is they'll say, oh man, look at that bright shiny object right there. I could make a lot of money on that bright shiny object. I'm gonna go buy that, right? And so they go out and you're a real estate investor, but one of your sellers has a pile of silver that they want to sell. And you get really distracted by that and you're like, oh yeah, I'll put $100,000 into that. That pile of silver is great. You're not a silver investor. You don't understand how silver works. That's not to say that you can't bring in the right people to figure that out, and if it's a good investment, it's still a good investment. But the point here is that you need to focus on single-family investing. I think a lot of people misinterpret the hedgehog principle, and they say, look, I'm going to focus on being a good wholesaler. And they pass up on deal after deal after deal after deal. I'll tell you right now, at least 80% of the deals that I've closed have been deals where I'm sweeping up after some other investor that didn't know how to close on this deal because they hadn't focused on other strategies. I always say you got to have a bat belt in this business. You got to be able to pull out whatever tool at whatever time to be able to take down that scenario in the best way for that scenario to work. Okay? So it's really important that you go through this series, not only my series with the creativecashflow.com series, but also anybody else that might have some education on a niche that you're unfamiliar with, look at it, learn it. There's a lot of different niches. There's a lot of different ways to make money in real estate here. So it's really important that your understanding of your place in this world revolves around, I'm going to make money in single-family real estate. Let's talk about some acronyms. You're going to hear us throw out a lot of acronyms through many series. That's a lot of stuff that we just use as shorthand in the investing world that might not make sense to you right at the beginning, okay? ARV, it's a pretty basic one, after repair value, okay? Your house right now that you're looking at, you just got to lead in, it's in tore up shape. It needs $25,000 worth of work. But what if you put that $25,000 in? What's it going to be worth at that point in time? That's what ARV is, okay? After it's been fixed up, what will it then be worth? We base everything in our world off of ARV, sometimes rental comps. You hear us talking about comps. Comp stands for comparable. We are comparing this house to other houses that have sold in that neighborhood around the same square footage, around the same year built, around the same, they've got to have the same amount of bedrooms, same amount of bathrooms. We want to see what that type of house sells for in this area. That's how we're comping a property, and that then becomes our ARV as long as that house is fixed up, right? That's what you want to look for in your comps. You want to look for a house ideally that sold within the last 60, 90 days that has a similar rehab to what you would be doing, right? If you're putting granite into the property, does this rehab have granite in it? So you want to look for those things, and when you find that shining example, really when you find 3 of those shining examples that say, hey, houses in this neighborhood that have 3 bedrooms, that have granite, that have hardwoods, that have a redone bathroom, they're all selling for $150,000. That lets you know once you put those things into it, it's going to be worth $150,000. LTV, loan to value. Okay, let's say you've got a loan on a house for $80,000. The house is worth $100,000. You're now at an 80% loan to value. Basis. This is one of those items that we're going to talk a lot about because basis, there's a few different interpretations of basis. You can have a cash basis. How much actual physical cash have you put into this deal yourself? You can have a total basis. How much money in general, through lending, through cash, through whatever, how much total money is put into this property? So let's look at an example real quick. Let's say that you find a house and they owe $50,000 on it. And you need to put in $20,000 worth of work in order for that house to be worth $100,000. Its ARV is 100, its current price is 50. Well, if you buy it for that 50, and you buy it subject to, and you take over on that mortgage, so essentially you've got your lending built into it, you're just going to keep paying those payments moving forward, and then you put $20,000 worth of cash into it. You have a cash basis of 20 grand. That's how much cash you've put into it. You have a total basis of $70,000 because you put 20 in cash, you put 50 in as the mortgage, so your total basis is 70. When we're talking about what your basis is versus the ARV, That is how you decide which properties are and aren't good deals, okay? So what you're gonna hear is you're gonna hear a lot of times where I might throw out the word cent or percent, cents on the dollar. I'm gonna say, for example, that last house that we were talking about, we put 50 into the mortgage, we put 20 in as cash. Well, that's at 70% of the ARV. Our basis is 70 cents on the dollar. Or I could say to somebody for short, I contracted this house at 70 cents. All right, that's gonna be some of the things that you're gonna hear us talk about. Why owner financing? Well, owner financing has a lot of great benefits to it. There's a couple of cons too. There's a lot of great benefits, and I'm a big fan of owner financing, and this is one of the reasons that I've chosen for this to be my niche. But one of the big things is that with owner financing, you don't have to deal with tenants, toilets, and trash, right? If you're a landlord, you're gonna have people calling you at all times saying, hey, look, my toilet's broken, I need you to send somebody out to fix it. Even if you've got a property manager in place, you're still dealing with tenants, toilets, and trash. You still have that on your mind. That's still something that matters. Now, there's benefits to renting, and I like to put my thumb on renting. A lot of got rentals, right? It makes sense. Sometimes they make sense. But there's a big pro to owner financing is that you don't deal with that stuff. What's another one? You've got set actual returns, okay? So one of the big mistakes that I hear newer investors making especially, but really this happens with everybody. I hear people all the time that are landlords and they say, oh, well, I'm making $450 a month on my rentals. I'm making $450 a month in cash flow. Well, the problem is, a lot of times what they're doing is they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, well, I'm spending $550 a month on my mortgage and I'm renting it for $1,000 a month. Therefore, I'm making $450 a month. The problem here, what happens when the AC breaks and you've got to put another $5,000 AC unit into it? Well, the profits for that year are absolutely shot, okay? So if you've only had that property for 2 years, now you're having to reevaluate what your cash flow is. You may have made $450 a month for the first year, but then you didn't make anything for the second year. So really, effectively, you've made $225 a month in actual cash flow. And a lot of people don't account for that. And a lot of people aren't making money because they don't account for that. They're just looking at the difference between their mortgage and their income and saying, hey, I'm doing pretty good. Look into that. Really make sure that you know what's going on there. One of the cool things about the owner financing world is that whenever I say I've got a $450 cash flow, I have a $450 cash flow. That money is not going anywhere but in my pocket, in my bank, whatever, paying for staff. That stuff I get to use. That's an actual set return. So with that, it allows us to really see easily what the returns are on that property. I always make the joke of, if you've got a mortgage with Wells Fargo, when was the last time that you called them and you said, hey, Wells Fargo, my back door's not shutting right. Can you send somebody out to fix that? They don't care. All they care about, they're going to say, well, no, I can't, but it's the 31st. You going to have your money for me tomorrow? Yes, okay. All they care about is getting paid, right? We're becoming the bank. As owner financiers, we're becoming the bank. All I care about is that your mortgage payment gets made. Taxes, insurance, repairs, that's all the responsibility of whoever buys it from us. Lost depreciation, this is a con, okay? This is one of the items where rentals are going to outperform the owner financed side. Let's say that you own a house and you sell it with owner financing to somebody. Well, at that point in time, let's say you sell it for $100,000, you get a $10,000 down payment, and their payment is $756 a month. So you're going to keep getting $756 a month for the next 30 years, or however long it takes them before they sell or refinance or whatever that might be, right? Well, if that was a rental, every year you'd be reevaluating. Or every 2 years you'd be saying, okay, look, rents around the area have gone up, now I'm going to charge this much. My house used to be worth $100,000 3 years ago, now it's worth $150,000, right? That's benefits that you get in the rental world that as an owner financer, once you've sold the property, you're done. You know what you're going to get, but you're done. You don't get anything else that's coming up on the back end from that, right? So that works against you in a couple of ways. A, you never get to raise the money, the payments. And B, as inflation occurs, the effective purchasing power of that money that you've received gets lessened and lessened and lessened over time. Now, that's one of the things that's referred to as time value of money. When you have to factor in how much is this money worth to me today? How much is this same amount of money worth to me in 10 years? There's a time value of money. It's literally worth less in 10 years because of inflation than it is today. You're going to see a lot of times that I throw out in the series where I'm talking about, oh, well, we've turned this $15,000 worth of equity into $150,000 of total income. I'm not accounting for time value of money. However, regardless of what value you use for time value of money to calculate if that's worth it, even if you took a quarter of that off, you're still making a ton of money off of a very little amount of equity in owner financing. So this is still, even with that being a con, one of the areas that I really enjoy. This is a niche that not a lot of people get into. Niches are great. I'm big into finding a niche and attacking it because it's kind of like the salmon swimming upstream, right? If everyone else is going one direction, everyone else is looking for this certain type of deal, they all want that deal at 70 or 75 cents, and you're able to come in and start buying at 95 or 100% and still making a ton of money, well, that's not a niche that everybody can do. So if you're that guy or if you're that girl, that opens up a lot of options for you that wouldn't have been opened up to you otherwise. And again, like I said, over 80% of my deals that I've closed have been sweeping up the mess after somebody else who is a wholesaler, who didn't understand that that was a smoking deal that I've made tons of cash on because they didn't know how to do the strategies that we're going to teach you in this series. There's a low barrier to entry in owner financing. Because the financing is going to be included in your purchase, if it's with subject to or free and clear, whatever. If you're buying with owner financing, what does it take? What does it take for you to buy that house with owner financing? Well, what it takes is you to be able to sit on the other side of the table from a seller, look them in the eye and explain what's going on. And then you've got everything in front of you, right? That's all it is. Now, education-wise, that's your barrier to entry. Figuring out how all of that works, that's the barrier of entry. But let me give you a secret. We're doing an entire series here that teaches you all the ins and outs. And I'll tell you what, whenever I was brought in to do this series, I was brought in because it was very clear that we're not pulling any punches. When we go through this at the end of this series, it's going to be a long series. At the end of this series, you will know every single little tiny minute detail to every big picture idea that I have used to get to a point in my career where I can go on vacation for a month to Japan and still buy 5 houses like happened last year, right? You've got to have these things, these systems set in place, and we are willing to show that to you. So use it. Take advantage of that. Learn how this stuff is going because that's all you need to do. And once you have that information under your belt, that's when you can go out and just become a machine. What else do we have? Foreclosures. You'll see I put this as a con ... right? So foreclosures in the owner financing world kind of suck, but they're kind of awesome. So here's my disclaimer to this. It is very, very, very important to me that you guys do things ethically, that you go out there, you only promise what you can do, and you put people into houses that you legitimately feel can pay you back that mortgage over time. People that don't do that give this business a bad name, and that makes everything harder for everybody, okay? But we need to do things the right way. We need to put people that can afford the house into these properties, and that's why things like Dodd-Frank and all these consumer protection laws that we'll talk about in separate videos have been put into place. Is because a lot of people weren't doing that. They've since been put into a lot of trouble. A lot of people got screwed, and now we have lending laws in place. But if we abide by all of that, and we do what we're supposed to, and we run our business ethically, even our worst case scenario is still a pretty good scenario. And what I mean by that is, let's say that we put somebody into our house. We sell it for $100,000, okay? Sell it for $100,000, take a $10,000 down payment. Well, you're gonna net from that down payment, you're gonna net about $7 grand because likely you're gonna spend 3% to a realtor to bring you that buyer, okay? 3% of $100,000 is $3 grand. Take that off of the $10,000 down payment that you received. You just got $7,000 in your pocket right up front, which, by the way, is pretty sweet, right? That is akin to wholesaling a property. You might get $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 from a wholesale, but now in this owner financing world, you're getting $7,000 up front, and you're setting up $300, $400, $500, $600 a month in cash flow that's going to keep recurring over these next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. But let's say that we do that. We get $7,000 up front. We're making $450 a month in cash flow on this property. And then we get 3 years in. and our buyer stops being able to pay us, okay? At that point in time, it's a hassle. Because yes, we are going to continue paying our underlying debt because it's the right thing to do, especially if you've taken over on a property subject to. You want to make sure that you can cover that debt to the bank that the seller had. We're going to continue paying that. That stinks. We're going to have to wait the prescribed amount of time to be able to foreclose on somebody. That stinks. It's going to cost you money, right? You might be down $5,000, $6,000 at that point in time. Counting the payments that you made, the attorney's fees of foreclosure, all that kind of garbage. However, once you actually go through that foreclosure, well now, 99% of the time, you own the house again. You take that house back. Even more so, a lot of times you can do what's called a deed in lieu of foreclosure, which we'll talk about later. And essentially, that's just them signing the house back over to you saying, hey, I wasn't able to pay for this house. Let me just sign it back over to you and call it a day. Okay, I got a lot of my houses back. The ones that I do have to get back, about half of those we get back through deed in lieu. Saves you a ton of cost. Well, earlier we said that you weren't going to get appreciation, right? But if you foreclose on this house and you now become the owner of the house again, if that house's value has gone up to 120 or 115 or whatever, well now you get to sell the house again for 115 or 120. Now you got to get a new 10% down payment. So now you're getting $15,000 down, right? You pay 3% to your seller or to your agent to bring you the buyer. Let's say it's a $115,000 house. That'd be $4,500 that you're paying to your agent. So you're netting from that $10,500. Okay, you spent $6 to get the person out of that, right? So now you've got $4,500 that you net in your pocket, cash, on top of that. Okay, it was a hassle, but you just made $4,500. Well, now you've got a new 30-year note with your new buyer, where now you're making another $500, $600 a month on cash flow because you're getting to sell it for the higher rate. And all the while, your first 3 years of your first buyer being in there, they were paying down the debt you had on the property. So you may have gotten into it initially owing 80, selling it for 100. 3 years goes by, you may be able to sell it for 115, and you only owe 75. So your spread gets bigger, you get a bigger down payment, you get the appreciation, you start a new 30-year note on it, and it actually turns out making you a ton more money. So again, I want to reiterate, be ethical. Do not put people in there that you're just counting on foreclosing on. That will bite you in the butt. But in the worst case scenario that you have to foreclose, everything's going to be okay for you. There's lots of legalities. There's lots of legalities in this business. That's one of the cons to it, is you really got to know what you're doing, right? There's compliance issues, Dodd-Frank namely, state and local laws that you've got to be aware of to know what you can and can't do when you're giving a mortgage to somebody. And there's a lot of laws, especially behind how to take over on a mortgage, if you're doing subject to, for instance. So there are a lot of legalities. Work with an attorney that is familiar with owner financing. Don't just go to some attorney who's going to charge you $350 to close on this deal, and he's going to write up a note and a deed of trust. Any monkey attorney can do that. What you need is you need an attorney that's used to owner financing. You're probably going to spend closer to the $1,000 mark on your closing to get that done, but there's going to be a lot more disclosures and a lot more CYA, and that's one of the reasons why I say that this is such a low liability business. This is unlimited funding. When you have an owner-financed deal, you're not having to go get approved from a banker. Nobody's looking at your debt-to-income ratio and saying, okay, this person can't afford this house. If you've got owner financing under your belt, all you have to do is sit across from the table and convince that person that it's the right thing to do to allow you to make monthly payments moving forward. It's unlimited, non-institutionalized, non-recourse funding. Non-recourse being the final pro here. When you do this the right way and you are using your LLC like I've talked about using, you've set that all up and you've got the proper disclosures, you've gone through the proper attorneys and done everything the right way, the recourse is extremely small. I mean, we've got dang near zero liabilities in this outside of our ethical liabilities. We need to make sure that we're doing the right thing, and I can't stress that enough. However, on paper is all that matters legally. And on paper, we have very little that can come back and bite us if we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's, okay? So, owner financing, again, one of my favorites. This is a great way to get going in real estate. It's a great way if you don't have a lot of funds to begin with, if you're just trying to get in, this is an awesome, awesome strategy. Watch our entire series here to continue learning about what's going to be going on, and then, like I said, at the end of it, you're going to know all the ins and outs and all the details to get this going. All right. Thanks.